I'll be talking to you about what are the basics about this disease and how to manage OPD in the COVID era. So the area which I won't be focusing much is on microbiology and obviously how to manage the ortho OT part, because that does not come under my domain. Otherwise, I'll be covering about some basics about this disease, what are the changes that are required, and I'll be putting a lot of stress on PPEs. Basically, I think there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of information that is available. Some of it is authentic, some of it is not actually authentic. So I'll start my talk with basically what are we dealing with when we are dealing with COVID-19. So this is a family of viruses which are present in different uh, uh, parts of the world, and they have been present since a long time. There are various types. So what we need to focus on is the SARS-CoV-2. So basically, these are zoonotic viruses. They are basically always found in animals, and sometimes there is some mutation happening because of which these can be then found in humans. So there is a change because of which they jump uh, from the animals to human. So when it comes to the SARS-CoV-2 that we are seeing right now, so how does the transmission happen? The transmission is basically droplet transmission. So this is basically due to your respiratory tract. So whenever a person who is infected, if he is coughing or sneezing, so whatever the aerosols are generated, so any person in contact with approximately 1 meter around can catch hold of this infection whenever these aerosols come in contact with his own mucosa, which can be either the mouth or the nose or the conjunctiva. And another source of transmission is the fomite. So whenever there is a presence of these aerosols on the surfaces around us, that is the time when we see that there is fomite transmission. So when it comes to viability of this virus around us, so in case of aerosols, it is present approximately for around 3 hours. There is some relation to temperature that it is seen that a lower temperature will favor a higher persistence of this virus, and an absolute humidity of more than 10 gram per meter square could possibly slow down the transmission of this virus. Now on the right side of the screen, you can see these are the various surfaces on which uh, the coronavirus can actually persist. So for plastic, it has been said approximately 5 days. For aluminium, it is 2 to 8 hours. Surgical gloves, approximately 8 hours. Steel is 48 hours. Wood can be approximately 4 days. Similar is for paper and glass. So these are the sources which we consider as a source of fomite transmission. So you might not come in contact with a person who is actually infected, but he has coughed or sneezed on a wooden surface. You touch that wooden surface, and then inadvertently you keep on touching your eyes, your nose, your mouth, and that is how you get the infection. So the virus can be inactivated with 62 to 71% of ethanol or 0.5% of hydrogen peroxide solution. There are other biocidal agents which are not exactly as effective as these ones. So coming to epidemiology, it was on the 31st December that China country office of WHO informed of case of pneumonia of unknown etiology, and this was detected in the Wuhan city, that is Hubei province of China, and this was identified as the 2019 NCOV at that time, and then eventually the name of the virus was given as SARS-CoV-2, and the disease which is caused is COVID-19. So this is also something very important, that the name of the virus is SARS-CoV-2 and the disease that is caused is COVID-19. And there have been different strains that have been found. One is a type L and then there is a type S. These are findings from China basically. So as I had said, before we had SARS-CoV-2 in 2002 to 2003, which was again originating in China and involved at least another 12 to 24 countries with approximately 8,000 cases and 800 deaths. And then there was MERS-CoV-12, which was a Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, which began in Saudi Arabia and had approximately 2,500 cases and 800 deaths, and is still seen around causing sporadic cases. So this is the current scenario. This was updated yesterday night. So you can see the picture, and the new cases are approximately 73,911 with approximately 2.6 to 2.7 million confirmed cases. So this is data from WHO, and this is the demographic distribution according to various countries with confirmed cases, recovered cases, and total number of deaths. So this is also up to date since till yesterday night. So for India, you can see there are approximately 23,000 confirmed cases. So very small video on breaking the chain. So I'll be explaining you basically when we deal with a disease like a pandemic. So basically first we talk about an epidemic. So epidemic is basically any disease which is limited to a time frame and limited to a geographical distribution. When the same disease is continued for a very long time at the same time, same geographical location, it is called endemic. For example, we see malaria throughout the year. So malaria is endemic to our country. And then comes pandemic. This is any epidemic which is now seen all over the world without any geographic limitation. So that is when it is called a pandemic. Now we'll go through a very short demonstration on how the stages of a pandemic are. So here you can see that whenever a person arrives to our country and is the first person positive, this is what we call as stage 1. And then eventually whenever anybody else comes in contact with this first person, so this is called as stage 2. So this part of the disease is the easier part, where contact location and testing is very easy, because you know who has come in contact with whom, and eventually you can isolate each and every individual who's been tested positive or who has a history of travel to a specific country. Now what happens next is stage 3. So when this person who is from stage 2 has started transmitting the infection into the community, is where we call it as stage 3. And this is the stage where it is very difficult to actually go for contact location or isolation of each and every individual. Then we come to how do we break the chain. So usually what we see is that there is a first person who's the first infected person. In terms of COVID-19, what we see is that one person has the potential of infecting at least 3 to 4 people at the same time. So this is how the community transmission actually spreads. So it is basically one person who comes in contact with 3 to 4 people, and this is how that if next person comes in contact with another 3 to 4 people, and there is an exponential growth. So what we see is that the number increases from hundreds to thousands, then thousands to lakhs, and this is the reason why there has been a sudden outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. So breaking the chain is basically when we ask the people to follow social distancing, social isolation. We ask them to follow certain precautionary measures such as washing their hands, using masks, and contact tracing. So what happens is whenever you limit the mobility of an infected person inside the community, so you are technically breaking the chain. So you are limiting the number of people who are coming in contact with this first individual or any infected individual. And eventually what we are doing is we are breaking the chain over here. We are breaking the spread of disease. So what we had seen earlier was an exponential growth. So now what we see is that we are limiting the exposure of infected person to the community, and eventually we are limiting the spread of disease. Now you can see that the number of people who are getting infected are getting limited directly, and we are now seeing a decrease in number of cases in the community. So this is what is happening right now in India. The lockdown is working effectively when it comes to breaking the chain. Now, when it comes to lockdown, why do we have a lockdown now? You can see behind me there is a graph which shows x-axis as the time from the first case and y-axis as the number of cases. There is a red line which has been called the capacity of healthcare. So the red line shows the capacity of your hospitals, of your government, of the healthcare infrastructure to actually take care of patients who are coming to the hospital getting admitted for treatment. The problem here is we already have a lot of patients who are suffering from other diseases such as lung cancer, patients who are suffering from regular pneumonias, viral pneumonias, patients of orthopedic diseases, patients of gynecological diseases. So what happens is whenever we have an increased number of cases, so these cause an overburden on your existing hospital infrastructure. And what we go here into is an overburden, which is the red zone or the danger zone. So you can see the number of cases which go beyond your capacity is basically the red zone. This is where you go into the danger zone. What we need to do here is the lockdown will help the government to prepare itself. It will help the hospital infrastructure to prepare itself for the burden of diseases. So we are not decreasing the number of cases, we are just delaying the outcome. What we can see in Italy, that a lot of cases came into the hospital during a short period of 1 month. India will see that these number of cases will be coming to the hospital over a period of 2 to 3 months, thus giving us enough time to deal with this problem. So coming back to the pathophysiology, as I had said, this is a zoonotic virus usually found amongst animals, and due to certain mutations that have been noted, they jump from animals to humans. Why is it called a coronavirus? It is basically called a coronavirus because of the spike glycoprotein, which is seen on its microscopic structure, seen as spikes around it, seen as crowns. So that is why the name is coronavirus. So coming to pathophysiology, during disease progression, there is an early infection phase where there are local symptoms of throat irritation, dry cough with fever, myalgia, followed by a pulmonary phase where is injury to lung parenchyma with hypoxemia, cardiovascular stress, and then severe hyperinflammatory phase where we see a cytokine storm, and the basic involvement that is seen is of interleukin 6. Clinical features of importance is incubation period is 4 to 14 days. Most of the patients will have mild to no pneumonia, that is 81%. Severe disease will be seen in approximately 14%, and 5% of the patient might come across as critical disease. This is data from China. The data is varying with various countries. Italy has shown a critical disease rate of more than 10% due to various other demographic factors such as age of population and intermingling of the different age groups. Symptoms that we commonly see is fever, fatigue, dry cough, anorexia, myalgia. ARDS is a major complication, and other symptoms include headache, sore throat, rhinorrhea, and GI symptoms also. So now you cannot suspect a patient to be of COVID positive only for the respiratory symptoms. New York has seen a lot of cases who have come as with GI symptoms, complaints of pain of abdomen, and have turned out to be COVID-19 positive. Some case definitions, these are more for the theoretical purpose rather than practical purpose, but we can go through that. Suspected case is a patient who has acute respiratory tract infection and with no etiology that fully explains the clinical presentation, and with a history of travel to a country which has a reported local or community transmission. or a patient with acute respiratory illness and having in close contact with a confirmed or probable case in the last 14 days, and a patient with severe acute respiratory infection and requiring hospitalization and with no other etiology that fully explains the clinical presentation. Now, what do we call as a close contact? So, close contact of a probable or confirmed case is defined as living in the same household as COVID-19 case. Any person who has direct physical contact with a COVID-19 case, person with unprotected direct contact with infectious secretions, a person having a face-to-face contact with COVID-19 case within 2 meters, person who is worked in a closed environment, that is a classroom, meeting room, hospital waiting room, or any healthcare worker providing direct care to COVID-19 case. So these are the various definition for a close contact. Now coming to diagnosis of COVID-19 disease, these are the various specimens that have been found to be useful for positivity rates. The maximum positivity rate has been seen for bronchoalveolar lavage, which is obtained via bronchoscopy, followed by sputum as well as nasopharyngeal swab, and even feces has shown approximately 29% positivity rate. Now I'll be shortly talking about the diagnostic test. This is another part which comes more into microbiology, but we have the RT-PCR test, which has the advantage of it can be produced on need basis as soon as the viral sequence is known. It is highly specific of almost 100%, and test becomes positive in the early phase of the disease. There are complications with the RT-PCR that it is uh, complicated, it is expensive, and mostly suited for centralized reference laboratories. And sensitivity might be as low as 50 to 70%, and it can become negative in the later phases of disease as the patient's immunity builds up. Relatively, now we talk about the antibody test, which is the IgG and the IgM. The advantages here is rapid screening of carriers, symptomatic or asymptomatic, in hospitals, clinics, and test laboratories. Qualitatively detecting IgM and IgG. The combined assay for IgM and IgG has a better utility and sensitivity compared to IgM and IgG. The antibody tests are cheaper and the results are relatively faster. And specificity is also good for screening test. The disadvantages here is it can be negative in the early phases. IgM rises usually in the 3rd to the 7th day of symptom. IgG can be seen approximately from the 12 to 15 day, and the specificity can be a bit of concern when it comes as a diagnostic test. So more useful as a screening test over here. HRCT has been found to be sensitive. The typical findings are GGO, smooth and irregular interlobar, lobular septal thickening, crazy paving pattern, air bronchogram, and irregular pleural thickening. Although CT chest is not a substitute for RT-PCR, considering that the testing according to the local recommendation and procedure for availability of RT-PCR, routine screening of CT for diagnosis or exclusion of COVID-19 is currently not recommended by most professional organizations. Taking your patient to the CT scan and findings are not always a useful screening test. There are certain poor prognostic factors which are related to a person. Age above 65 is one of them. Mortality has been seen more for age 70 to 79, which is 8%, and above the age of 80 is approximately 15%. More prevalence in a poor prognostic factor is seen in males. Presence of any comorbidities such as cardiovascular disease, pulmonary disease, diabetes, presence of malignancy, immunosuppression, or lab findings of severe lymphopenia, elevated troponin, elevated creatinine, LDH, CRP, and elevated D dimer. Now coming to a very important topic, which is HCQS prophylaxis. So the reasoning here is that the SARS-CoV-2 attacks the human cells via the angiotensin converting enzyme 2, which is the ACE2 receptor, and chloroquine in the in vitro studies have shown that it affects the glycosylation process of ACE2 receptor. HCQS has the same mechanism but with the better safety profile. The Indian Council for Medical Research, that is ICMR, has come up with a guideline wherein all healthcare workers, those involved in care of suspected or confirmed cases of COVID-19, can take 400 mg twice a day on day one, followed by 400 mg once weekly for next 7 weeks with meals. Asymptomatic household contacts of the lab confirmed cases can take 400 mg twice a day on day one, followed by 400 mg once weekly for the next 3 days with the meals. Although currently, due to lack of randomized clinical trials, clinical guidance on the use, dosing and duration of HCQS for prophylaxis of treatment of SARS-CoV-2 infection is lacking from the CDC. And similarly, the JHMI clinical guidelines do not recommend pre or post exposure prophylaxis in individual with suspected exposure to SARS-CoV-2. So finally, we are left with our own personal judgment to take a call on whether to go for HCQS prophylaxis or not. Various bodies, organizations, many pulmonologists are not in favor of this, but the ICMR has issued guidelines and have given recommendations on how to go for HCQS prophylaxis. Now coming to another very important part, which is the protection, and the PPE will be going through various levels of protection that are available. Again, there is no one size fit all formula for anyone over here. So these are from the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and these are the guidelines for the PPE kit. On the left side, you can see there are various recommendations for the gloves, how the gloves should be, and what should be the different sizes, and what should be the quality compliance over here. Then there are another guidelines for the coveralls, mostly pertaining to how they should be permeable to blood and body fluids, should be single use, culturally acceptable, that should be coming in colors as white or blue. Light colors are preferable to detect any contamination. There should be thumb and finger loops for the anchor sleeves. And there are various standardizations which are available. The WHO has given a very detailed summary of standardization for GSM 45, GSM 60, or GSM 90 also. Then there is the triple layer medical mask. Then there are the various N95 masks. There are recommendation on how the shape should be, what should be the filtration efficiency. It should have good breathability with an expiratory valve. Should follow the NIOSH N95 protocols and should be compliant, should be fluid resistant. Then there are various shoe covers and face shields. So these are the various guidelines and recommendations that have come from Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Now coming to the different qualities of the mask that are available, you can see on the right side there is the N95 mask, which has a 95% filtration rate, which is equivalent to the FFP2, and then there is N100, which is the FFP3 equivalent. You can see over here a table which shows the filtration capacity. So FFP1 is approximately 80%, FFP2 is 94%, and so on, and N100 is basically 99.97%. Now we are now facing an emergency, so when it comes to certain guidelines and recommendations, we have to adjust the resources. We have to use our resources according to availability in our environment, according to the resources that we have, according to the limitations that we are facing. So there are no RCTs to tell as to how you can actually reuse your N95. But this is a SOP which has come from AIIMS Hospital, New Delhi, on how you can actually repeat your N95 mask. So what they are asking you is to go for a cycle of masks. So what you can do is you can keep 4 masks for yourself individually. So these will be N95 mask, and you will be numbering each mask as 1, 2, 3, 4 with a pen on it. And for day 1, you will be using mask 1, day 2 will be mask 2, followed by day 3 and day 4. And whenever you are done using your mask after day 1, you have to keep the mask for drying for the next 4 days. After the 4 days, on day 5, you can come back to your mask number 1. And then day 6 will be mask number 2. So you have to repeat the cycle after the 4th day from day 5. So each mask is dried for approximately 4 days, and you can reuse the mask. This can be done for 5 times. So after 20 days, you have to now get a new set of masks of N95, which will be again numbered as 1, 2, 3, 4, and you start using as you had used before in the first cycle. So these are the SOP which have been recommended from AIIMS. Coming to PAPRs, PAPR is a very important tool when it comes to performing any aerosol inducing procedures such as intubation, bronchoscopy, or when you are inside the operation theater. The advantages here is definitely the filtration rate is very high. This is the safest modality that you have when it comes to avoiding cross infection or getting infected yourself. The limitation here is the availability. It's not available very easily. It's right now available in Bombay, in Hyderabad. There are limitations when it comes to bringing the PAPR from Hyderabad to your own city or from Bombay to your own city. And the cost is a big issue. The cost here is approximately 1,20,000 to 1,40,000. That is a very steep expense when it comes to actually how many times are you going to actually use this PAPR, how many procedures are you going to perform in the next 1 month, considering that we are anyways delaying all elective procedures. Then there are eye covers. You can see these are different eye covers. Some provide less protection, some provide maximum protection, depending on if you are using prescribed eyeglasses or not. And then there are face covers. So this is this is my personal experience while performing a procedure. So this is a hood basically, and as you can see, after 10 minutes of performing the procedure, there was fogging on my glasses, fogging on the hood shield itself. I myself went claustrophobic. I think I was retaining a lot of CO2. I had to ask my OT staff to remove this cover, and I continued the procedure with a basic face shield and an N95 mask. So there are various guidelines, but eventually when you start using all of these PPEs, there are certain difficulties. Safety is first, but then at the same time, what we need to make sure is that we are able to actually perform our duties, perform our procedures. We have, I think this has been discussed, but very small presentation on how to don a PPE. Donning and doffing of PPE cannot be taken casually. This is something which has to be done very meticulously. You have to keep note of every small detail. You can see this is what is basically included in your PPE. There is a protective hood. There is an N95 mask. You'll get 2 pair of gloves. You'll have a overhouse suit, a protective gown, goggles, a waste collection bag, and something which cannot be forgotten is the disinfectant. So as you can see, these are CDC guidelines telling the donning sequence. So you have to first perform hand hygiene, followed by a full coverage gown fastened at the neck and waist, then a mask or respirator as recommended, followed by gloves or goggles or face, and then eventually the gloves. So here you can see I first started with the hand hygiene. I've cleaned my hands, and then I'm following it with the shoe covers. Between each step of this, I have to make sure that I'm cleaning my hands with the disinfectant. So as you can see, the body cover mostly comes as a dungaree, and you need to step inside the body cover, for which you will require a chair. So basically you will need a room where you don your PPE. You have to be careful that you do not tear the PPE or do not cause a hole because of your shoes or shoe cover, because we don't want any leak when we are coming in contact with either suspect or confirmed COVID-19 patients. So you have to make sure that you are wearing it slowly and in a gentle way without causing any tear. And after you are done zipping up your body cover or maybe using a Velcro for closing it, you have to again perform hand hygiene. You have to make sure that your mask is fitting very tightly and snugly without any leak around it, followed by the goggles. And I'll be covering my head and ear with the hood of the PPE cover itself. This will be followed by wearing of gloves. So this is how you wear or don your PPE. Now, when you are performing any procedures, any aerosol inducing procedures, any procedure in the operation theater, you might have to go for a second cover of PPE. So this will be a second shoe cover, that will be knee length shoe cover. Followed by a second pair of gloves. A gown as an extra protection. And lastly, followed either by the hood or a face shield. As you can see, this complete process takes approximately 7 minutes. It's a very tiring process, and you have to keep these things on for at least for maybe 2 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, and you have to get used to wearing this. I won't be showing you the video for doffing, but there is a similar sequence. First, you have to remove your gloves, then you have to unfasten your gown and pull it away and dispose in the trash, and then goggles and face shields come out next. You are not supposed to touch the front of the mask. Remove by holding the elastic, and finally perform the hand hygiene. Now, for OPD setup, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has given a setting for triage area and different level of PPE that are to be used. Similarly, there is for inpatient setup also. OPD setup, you can see the triage area recommendation is N95 and gloves. For the waiting area, again is N95 and gloves. And for the doctor's chamber, you have to go for N95 mask as well as glove, and make sure you do not perform any aerosol generating procedures in this region. Inpatient services, for individual rooms, you have N95 mask, gloves. For the ICU and critical care area, you have full PPE, and similar when it comes to high risk and low risk patients. This is a short summary for who should be wearing what. You can see on the left, all housekeeping staff, canteen workers, administrative staff, pharmacy staff, and all visitors can wear a basic kit. For OPD staff, pathology staff, there should be a 70 GSM. And for doctors and healthcare workers who are coming in contact with suspected or positive patient, you have to go for the advanced kit. So various hospitals have come with their individual guidelines. This is something that we are following in our city, followed by the Vidarbha Hospital Association. So this is a triage chart which is given to the patient, and we ask the patient various questions, and then we go for the point system over here according to symptom of cough, cold, diarrhea, travel history, history of contact if you are a healthcare worker. So less than 3 is for home quarantine, approximately 4 to 6 goes for admission in a designated area, and above 6 is where you have to refer to COVID center. So again, as I said, these are tailor made. These are made by individual hospital centers. Apollo Chennai started this trend, and now various hospitals are working around it. So WHO is asking us to minimize the PPE need by using it judiciously and by coordinating the PPE chain supply. So according to WHO guidelines, somewhat very similar, you can see in the consultation room for outpatient facilities, the healthcare workers should wear a medical mask, gown and gloves for eye protection. And if there is any patient with respiratory symptom, uh, provide him medical mask, and patient without respiratory symptom, no PPE required. So a short summary of OPD practice: you have to minimize your OPD patients. These are different times. I know there are a lot of limitations when it comes to the financial constraint, the revenue that is being that is relatively now come to almost 10 to 15% of the regular revenue because lack of patients. But we still have to minimize the OPD patients. We can take use of telemedicine. The government has now allowed us to go for telemedicine. You are supposed to schedule your appointment. So make sure that you call your patients in the OPD according to appointment. Give a 15-minute slot for each patient. Call a patient at 12 o'clock. Make sure you call the next patient only after 12:15. You don't want all the patients coming up into your OPD, getting infected from each other or infecting you in this process. Your waiting area has to be now lined up in a very different way. What we are doing is that we are asking patient to sit on alternative chairs rather than sitting next to each other, and we have limited our staff. So you have to call for necessary staff. If you have a team of 4 people on your reception, just make sure you call them alternatively rather than overcrowding your OPD area. Uh, every patient has to come with one attendant only. We are in an emergency, so your door outside your clinic can actually dictate the terms as to how many people are actually allowed inside the OPD. Like you see in a grocery store or a supermarket, only 5 people are allowed to go inside, and the next 5 can go only when they come out. Similarly, your OPD should limit the number of people. They should maintain social distancing. The patient and the attendant should be wearing masks. The healthcare worker should be wearing minimal hospital scrub, mask, gloves, and shoes. And it might be useful if you can dedicate one area of your clinic for screening of these patients, wherein a nurse can actually go through the triage questionnaire. It can be a small room, it can be the veranda outside your clinic, but you can have what we call is a COVID corner, which is a screening area. Try to minimize your follow-up visit, avoid any interdepartmental referrals, minimize x-rays or any investigation. Try to shift your ECG, USG or CM to your emergency room or your OPD or your COVID corner, and again minimize admissions for inpatient care. Coming back to the basics, essential steps which need to reduce the risk is social distancing. Everybody should be wearing a face mask, regular hand wash. We cannot divert away from our basics, no matter how much PPE you are using and all. We have to have regular hand washing, hygiene. Maintain respiratory hygiene. You should cover your cough and sneeze with your napkin or with your hand. Dispose of the tissue paper. Uh, Maintain adequate hygiene of object surfaces which are frequently touched. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, or mouth. And follow a good daily hygiene of good sleep, good exercise, and a healthy diet. So the take home message here is there is no one size fit all formula. Big hospitals, corporate hospitals, hospitals having 30 consultants, a staff of 200 plus can follow different formula. A nursing home of 5 bed will have a different formula. So there's no one size fits all formula. Safety first. So you might be suffering from your financial revenue generation. You might be suffering that you are you are unable to attend all your patients, but what we have to keep in mind is safety first. We have to follow all protocols. We have to adapt to the new change. What we need to see is now what I have discussed is OPD practice in COVID era. I am not sure if we'll ever go back to pre-COVID era. Maybe things might remain the same forever. We might have changes forever. We might never go back to the world before your OPD was stacked with 40 patients waiting to meet you, crowding up in your OPD, not taking appointments. Maybe that might not happen ever again. Maybe we'll always be in a new era, and we have to brave the new world. I'm thankful to my team. This is my team of interventional pulmonology at KRIMS Hospital. This is the Arbut safety box, bronchoscopy safety box, which was invented in April 2020 and now has gotten international appreciation and has been published by the Italian Thoracic Society. That's my team of my mentors, my colleagues who guide me. So I'll end this presentation by saying that these are words from Dr. Albert Einstein and Bernard Shaw, that the measure of intelligence is the ability to change, and those who cannot change their mind cannot change anything. So we are in an emergency. We are in a new world. We are now going to step into a new world, and we have to adapt to this new change. Thank you.
Okay, Samir, really excellent overview on all the COVID problems, how the COVID has started, and importance of lockdown and other all details of the guidelines. And the most important thing, all these are evidence based. That is the most important thing. Now, one more thing I want to ask, whether all these recommendations what you have given on the evidence base, whether they are related only to the fever OPD or like our orthopedic OPD, where many of
Yes.
the patients that doesn't come with respiratory problems. They are also all the same things we have to plan.
So most of the slides that I've shown, only one of the slide was focused on respiratory clinic. Rest of them are applicable to all the clinics.
Okay.
And as I said, the difference is that right now India is in a stage where we are not having a lot of community spread. So
Okay.
maybe after 15 days or a month, we might see that patients coming with pain in abdomen, patients. This I'm telling you because of the first-hand account that has been published from New York and from Italy, that they had a patient of RTA, and the patient of RTA was shifted to the CT scan, and the next day the patient came positive, absolutely no symptoms of cough or fever. So we have to be careful as much as possible, but then you have to alter these recommendations according to the resources that are available around you. Cost is a big issue, availability is another issue, and you don't want your patients or your staff to actually run away with the fear that, oh my God, we are constantly inside a COVID OPD.
Okay, great. And congratulations for internationally recognizing your Arbut safety box.